All right, here we go. Today we have John Boxer Mendoza, former high-ranking member of the Nuestra Familia. Welcome to VladTV.
Thank you. How you doing, Vlad?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Appreciate you coming in. You have a very, very interesting story. And since it's your first time here, I want to start in the very beginning. So you grew up in the Bay Area.
San Francisco. Yes, sir.
Okay. I grew up in San Mateo myself.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I grew up in San Mateo, and then I, went to school in Berkeley, so I was in the East Bay. So up until a point in my life, the Bay was home, as it was for you. So you were born and raised in the Mission District in San Francisco.
Yes, sir. Yeah, 24th and Mission. I used to run around between 24th and 16th and Mission.
Okay. And before you were born, your parents were childhood sweethearts. And I guess your mom became pregnant when she was 17?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. So she had you very young, still in high school. And then by the time you were 1, your dad ended up leaving, right?
Right.
So do you have, at 1 year old, you don't have really any memories of your dad. So did you ever meet your dad at some point?
I ended up meeting him later on. Like you said, I don't have no memories of him when I was younger, but I ended up meeting him later on, I think around the age of 12.
Okay. I mean, up to that point, and we're going to get into what happened during those 12 years. Did it bother you not knowing your dad, never meeting your dad and so forth?
I mean, later on, as I got older, it did. I started hearing some of the stories about, when I was growing up, the relationship that him and my mother had. It was a toxic relationship. I didn't really trip on it though, man. Be honest with you, I was going through foster care. There was a lot going on in my life at that time. So, later on when I would meet him, it kind of bothered me that he wasn't around.
Well, let's talk about the foster care. So you were put in foster care at age 2.
Right.
Okay. And how many kids did your mom have at this point?
There was me and I got 2 other brothers that she had in another relationship.
Okay, and all the kids went to foster care?
All 3 of us went to foster care. I'm actually in contact with one of my brothers now. The other one ended up getting adopted out, so he got lost in the system.
Okay, and I mean, when it comes to mothers, they will really do anything to keep their kids. The foster care system is usually the absolute last resort. So, in terms of your mom, why did she tell you that she had to give you up at that point?
Well, she was a young addict. She was addicted to heroin. And, taking care of 3 kids, as you said, my father, he dipped out when we were young. So, she couldn't take care of us. I think she did what any mother would do that was in a position she was in. She wasn't able to provide for us, so she thought, it'd be better to put us in foster care. She did the only memory that I have of my mother at that age is when she actually took me into child services, and I remember just walking in with her, and she started crying. She knelt down. She put my hand in one of the child services hands, and then she walked out. That's all I remember. And then, I remember going through foster care and all that.
Well, I've interviewed people that went through the foster care system. I've heard some real horror stories.
Yeah.
I've heard people going through like 20 different foster homes. I've heard of abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. What was your experience going through foster care?
Luckily, I never went through no kind of sexual abuse or nothing like that, but I seen a lot of crazy stuff being in foster care. I seen domestic violence. There was actually a home I was in where they got into the father ended up stabbing the mother, and I got removed. All the kids ended up getting removed out of that home. There was other homes that I was in, and they treated the foster kids like they treated them like shit. There was some abuse involved as far as just like mental, a little bit of physical. That's about it.
I mean, how old were you when you were in the house where the couple ended up stabbing each other?
I think that one was probably I was around 4 or 5. I was young.
What does that do to a 4 or 5-year-old, seeing two people in your family, the family that you're in, not your actual parents, but the two people that are supposed to be taking care of you fighting, then one of them stabs the other?
To be honest with you, I was really able to suppress a lot of that stuff. Those memories, I seen it. It's something that I never forgot about. I'm sure it had some type of, psychological effect on me, but I was able to suppress a lot of that stuff over the years. I really didn't think about it.
Okay. And then at age 10, your mom went and got you out of foster care.
Well, she maintained some type of relationship with me, some level of, we had a relationship. I was in foster care. She would show up. She would pop up at different times. So I knew who she was. One time she kidnapped me. She took me, she flew me out to Oregon for a couple of days. And, the foster mother the home I was living in at that time, she basically said, look, I'm not trying to get you in trouble. You need to bring him back. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to report it. So she brought me back. And, since I had that relationship with her, I maintained contact with her. Eventually, I ended up in my biological grandmother's house. She was a foster mother. She was, I don't know what it is. They register with the county or whatever to become a foster parent. So I was in her home for, I want to say about a good year. And I ended up running away from her house, and I linked up back with my mom. And from that point, she took me down not to child services, but to youth guidance center where they had the courts in San Francisco. And she led them to believe that there was some stability in her life at that time, but really she was still using heroin. And she was able to get custody of me.
Okay, so at 10 years old, you went back home.
Yeah.
Okay, and your mom at that point had a boyfriend.
She did.
Okay, and the two of you actually had a good relationship.
He would become my stepfather. They were together, and he embraced me as my father, my stepfather. I embraced him as my father. And he basically raised me up until the day he died. He's been involved in my life. So, when I first moved in with them, I didn't know what they were doing. I had no idea there was any drug use or anything like that. They did I was doing the normal things a kid my age was doing. I was going to school. They kind of hid all that stuff from me.
Okay, well, by age 12, you actually start experimenting with drugs yourself.
Yes, I did.
Okay, so what were you doing at that point?
So, my mom and stepfather, they would go out. I thought they were working legitimate jobs. I would go to school, I'd come home, and they'd be out all day. So eventually I kind of caught on that they weren't working legitimate jobs. And they used to go in their room for like 10 minutes every day when they would come home. I would see them count large amounts of money. So I got curious. I ain't no peeping Tom, man, but one day I went outside and I looked through their window and they were both tied off and they were shooting heroin. It blew my mind when I seen it. And the next day, I didn't say nothing that night, but the next day I approached my mom when my stepfather was gone. He left the house and I approached her. I know what's going on. And I asked her, I told her I wanted to try it. And, she was like, I'm not gonna give you no heroin. Give me those, I don't know if I can cuss on here, man, but she used a lot of profanity. She was like, get the fuck out of here. I'm not gonna give you no dope. If you're gonna do that, you're gonna do it on the street. And I gave her the outfits back. We were going back and forth. And I know people have an opinion about a mother like that gave their 12-year-old child heroin. I get it, man, but the way I look at it is my mom, she was caught up in that cycle herself. She was a victim of that cycle. She might not have made the best choice, but, I was a real manipulative kid as well. And I told her, if you don't give it to me, I'm gonna go out on the streets and get it. And hopefully I get some bad shit, you know what I mean? Eventually she caved in. She was like, she told me, she was like, you really want to try it? She was like, well, she cut off a little piece. She gave it to me. I got a mirror like I knew what I was doing. I started chopping it up. I think I seen something on HBO or something. Somebody was snorting some cocaine or something. I didn't know how to do black tar heroin, but I chopped it up and I looked over at her and she's glaring at me. She was like, you really gonna fucking do it? And I'm like, I wanna try it. So she's like, you're gonna do it, you might as well do it right. So I gave it back to her. She put it in a cooker, cooked it up. Me being 12, I'm scared to get poked with the needle. I put my little arm out and tell her, man, don't hurt me, you know what I mean? And you know, she put that needle in my arm, and from that day forward, probably for the next, I don't know, next 30, almost 40 years, that shit destroyed my life, man, in a bunch of different ways.
I mean, I've never tried heroin myself, but I've always heard that heroin is the worst drug. You know, I remember reading a book by Donald Goines, Dope Fiend. And it started out with like a heroin house, and they would make the heroin addicts, like the female heroin addicts, have sex with like German shepherds, you know, for their amusement. You know, I've always heard like the big D boys would have heroin addicts on their squad because they need someone to just go shoot up the whole house. They'll do it because they get so dope sick and they'll do anything for a hit of heroin. I mean, is this accurate?
I mean, when you're addicted to heroin, it'll make you'll lose sight of your values to get well. Yeah, you know, I'm sure. I mean, I never went that far to do something. You know, when I was sick, when I was going through my struggles out there on the streets, I was robbing people. I did whatever I had to do to get myself well. But yeah, it does. It destroys people like that. I've heard the same kind of stories.
Yeah. Yeah, man. For everyone's watching, if you haven't tried it, please do not try it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So by 13, you were already strung out on heroin and addicted.
I was. So I started doing it here and there. My mom would, obviously her and my stepfather were strung out. So she would, when he come home, he didn't know about it at first. He didn't know I was doing anything. But when I would leave their room, I'd look at her and I'd tell her, like, save me a little bit. And, they do their thing. Then she come in my room, she give it to me, she inject me. And, eventually I woke up, I started getting sick. And she was like, fuck, you're strung out. You know what I mean? So obviously I had to tell my stepfather. He played that role like he was gonna kick me out the house. He's like, you can't stay here no more, man. You're gonna start fucking, TV's gonna start coming up missing. He was like, you gotta go, man. So I'm 13, I'm trying to act tough. I'm like, fuck it, I'll go, man. I grab my duffel bag, start packing my shit, grab a couple pairs of socks and some shirts and acted like I was gonna leave. And my mom's like, he ain't gonna kick you out, let me talk to him. So 20 minutes later, he calls me and I go in their room, I'm like, what's up? He's like, there's something on the TV for you. So I look on top of the TV and I'm looking. The only thing that was up there was an outfit and a tie to tie myself off. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, you talking about this? And he's like, look, man, if you're gonna be doing that shit, you're gonna have to support your own habit. He's like, I'm not gonna support your habit for you. And your mom, she's not gonna be fixing you no more. You're gonna have to learn how to do that shit yourself. So I learned how to poke myself. He taught me how to bag it up, how to sell it. At that time, everybody was keeping heroin. They were wrapping it up in balloons out there in the Mission District. And that's how we used to sell it. And that's because the narcs would run up on you and try to choke you out, so you could swallow it and get it back up. But, he taught me how to support my own habit, how to sell it. So at that point, any concept of any childhood I had was gone. I grew up kind of fast from that point.
Well, around this time, you met one of your older homies named Sleepy.
Yeah.
So tell me about Sleepy.
Sleepy, so I started kicking it I started associating with the Norteño-based street gang, LTM. It's like the younger members, and then you got SFM, San Francisco Mission. Sleepy he was a part of that neighborhood, and, I refer to him as like my criminal mentor because he laced me up and taught me everything that I learned as far as being a criminal out there on the streets. Everything from, we started out, we used to call it decking, going, looking for cars in the 2 or 3 in the morning, tearing out the stereos, the speakers, the amplifiers. We'd sell those for drugs, and then, everything just continued to escalate. We did burglaries. We started doing, residential, commercial. Then we started doing what I call nickel and dime robberies, where we just run up to somebody, sock them up, go through their pockets, take their jewelry. And then it continued to escalate. We started using weapons. People started getting hurt. And that's when I started to learn that as a youngster, as a young gang member, that the more violent I was, the more blood that I spilled out there on the streets, the more respect I got. That's just how the streets work. It's the same thing in prison. You get your respect and your credibility by stabbing people, by hurting people. So that was something that I learned on the streets at a young age.
Well, in your book, you said takeover robberies and home invasions became your specialty.
Right.
What is a takeover robbery?
Takeover robbery is when you go into a store or a business and you go in there and you take it over. You have everybody move to one side, or however you're gonna go in there and do it, lay everybody out. And, depending on what kind of store it is, you'll go in there, you'll go through the registers, you take all the money, the merchandise, depends on what kind of store it is. But that's basically when you go in and take it over.
Okay, and home invasions. What kind of home invasions were you doing?
So Sleepy was actually living at my house. My mom embraced him as kind of like my stepbrother. So every night we'd leave at around 2 in the morning and we go out casing the neighborhood looking for houses to rob. We look for people getting up, going to work, or we just go up, knock on somebody's door, and when they'd answer the door, we rush in. There were times we tied people up, go in, take all the things that we thought were of value, jewelry, money, coins. We took all kind of stuff, but that's pretty much what a home invasion is, going in and robbing a house where there's people actually inside the house.
Yeah, some years back, I was a victim of a home invasion. It was actually over a girl. Her ex-boyfriend jumped in through the window in the middle of the night, and that was the most terrifying thing I ever went through.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd killed him. It got so violent at one point, because I thought that I was going to die that night, that I thought I had killed him. I walked out of the room thinking he had died. I'm saying this because a home invasion, I feel, is one of the most dangerous things you could do, because once you invade someone's home, all the rules are off the table. There's no code of conduct. There's no fair fight. It might be the last thing you ever do, because that person will do whatever it takes to protect themselves. Kill you, kill whoever's with you, and they're fully justified in doing it. So did you have any fear or any concept of what is about to happen doing this home invasion?
There's always a level of fear. That's a natural reaction. Anytime I would do something like that, where there's, some level of violence involved, there was some fear. But like you said, when you go up into somebody's spot, anything can happen. You never know. You might run up in somebody's house and they got a gun within reach. We might end up having to lay somebody out. So, I would tend to agree. That's probably the most personal thing that you can do, and it does traumatize people. I get it now that I'm older. Somebody did that to me and my family now. I can understand how it would traumatize somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. That moment changed my whole life. Like I don't look at life the same after that particular moment. Whatever fear I had leading up to that point in my life, I lost a lot of it after that moment, because I was in a situation of do or die. It was like, okay, this is the first time I felt like if I don't do something, I'm going to die in this room. And I had to do what I had to do to get out of that situation. So yeah, it's a very serious situation. Okay, so from all these robberies and crimes you were doing, were you getting arrested around this time?
eventually I would start to get arrested. As a juvenile, I caught a couple of, I probably robbed both of my neighbors. I burglarized both of the houses on both sides of us. My own neighborhood, those were the people that I was robbing. But I ended up, I think I dropped some mail. I dropped some mail in one of the neighbors' house when I was in there burglarizing the house. So I caught a burglary, and then I caught a robbery as a kid. Luckily I had a probation officer that took an interest in me, wanted to keep me out of the youth authority. Dude kept on giving me chance after chance. They put me through residential drug treatment. They understood that, as a 12, 13-year-old, I was strung out. Other kids in juvenile hall, they weren't even involved in the kind of things I was involved in. They were still kids. But I was in there, dealing with some real shit. I was going through withdrawals. I heard kids outside my window, looking through my window when I was laying in bed, like, man, this motherfucker's in there, he's kicking heroin. You know what I mean? So, I started getting caught up as a juvenile. And then later on, I would obviously get caught up as an adult.
Okay. And, you had the older homeboy that introduced you to the gang life, but were you considered a norteño at that point?
Yeah. So being young like that and affiliating myself with that neighborhood, it's not like somebody sat me down and indoctrinated me about what it meant to be a gang member or, what I was really representing. I had no real concept of that. All I know is that I identified myself as being a norteño, that my color was red. That's what I represented. That, 14 was a number that we also represented, and that basically anything that wore blue was a target, was an enemy. I mean, anything that was a Hispanic, somebody that looked like a gang member. And a lot of the times, there were people that would get victimized just because they were wearing the wrong color, a cowboy jersey or a Dodger baseball cap, and they weren't even affiliated. But I identified with that color blue as being an enemy.
Well, right, because growing up in the Bay, there really were no Crips and Bloods during that time.
Not really. You had a little bit here and there, but no, they weren't really out there at that time.
Exactly. So the red and blue really became dominant as norteño, sureño.
Right.
But were there actual, because, Bakersfield was the dividing line between norteños and sureños. Were there a lot of people claiming sureños in Northern California like that?
No, it was all red on red at that time. Norteños going against other norteño neighborhoods. In the Mission District, there weren't no sureños out there. You might find one or two out there that were trying to identify themselves as being a sureño, but really being a bona fide sureño from Southern California, they weren't out there like that.
Okay, so let's just talk about the origins of norteños and Nuestra Familia. So from what I read, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, members of the norteños are considered to be foot soldiers of the Nuestra Familia, but being a member of Nuestra Familia does not actually mean that you're a norteño. Is that right?
Well, when the NF, when it first originated, it wasn't about, it wasn't like there was, it wasn't geographical, wasn't whether you're from Northern or Southern California. It was what you believed in. There were two organizations at that time. There was the Mexican Mafia, there was the Nuestra Familia. So both of these organizations, they had a different philosophy. So it just depended on what you believed in. As time went on, geography became a part of it. That's when that Bakersfield became that dividing line where anything south of Bakersfield to to Mexico, to the border, was considered Mexican Mafia, their recruiting grounds. Anything from Bakersfield northern towards Oregon was considered NF recruiting grounds. So that's when it started to just be exclusively norteños and exclusively sureños.
Well, right. The Nuestra Familia started out in Soledad in 1960.
Right.
And originally, they were affiliated with the Mexican Mafia, La M, but then there was a split that happened. And there was a situation in 1965 over a pair of shoes. right?
Right.
And I think it's referred to as the War of the Shoes or the War of the Slippers, something like that.
It's referred to in prison lore as the shoe war. You know, that's the other thing though. A lot of people seem to think that these two organizations were involved at one time. Like the NF was a part of the Mexican Mafia and they split. That's not how it happened. These guys that formed the NF, these guys were the non-affiliated guys. And they started to get abused by the Mexican Mafia. And that's when they started to they came together as a result of that. And, you know, at first it was just, they were talking in secrecy amongst each other. Nobody wanted to come out and stand up against the Mexican Mafia because they had a fierce reputation back in those days, them and the Aryan Brotherhood. So eventually, you know, these guys that banded together, they decided, you know what, enough's enough. The shoe war was the straw that broke the camel's back. That was like, you know what, fuck these dudes, man, enough's enough. Let's just go ahead and that's when they took a stand against them.
Well, right. I mean, that shoe war that started in 1965, they say is the longest running gang war in the state of California.
Yeah.
Because even to this day in 2023, it's still going.
Right now, there's something that's going on. It's called the agreement to end hostilities. So they're not at war no more. The Norteños and the Sureños in all the prisons in California right now they're selling up together. They're walking the yard together. They're out there playing sports. They're backing each other up against other groups out there when they get into a conflict. I never thought I'd ever see the day that would happen. In my era, the war was on, but they have a peace treaty out there right now. In the federal system, though, they're still at war. And on the streets, it really hasn't bled out to the streets. The streets, it's like, they might say that everybody's on that, you know, on that same page, but I wouldn't feel comfortable walking down Whittier Boulevard with the red slingshot on. I'll tell you that right now.
Well, I remember my introduction to Mexican Mafia and Nuestra Familia was the movie American Me. It was actually the movie that made me never want to go to prison after seeing all the rape scenes and so forth. Based on your, experience, how accurate is that movie?
A lot of it was inaccurate. You know, even the storyline of Edward James Olmos, he was supposed to be playing the role of Cheyenne Cadena, that was like the Mexican Mafia's visionary. He got killed off the tier. He was the guy that got stabbed and then he was thrown off the tier. That was the NF that killed him. He was one of their leaders, the Mexican Mafia's leaders. That's when the war really, it kicked into gear from that point on. After that, it was a bloodbath. And that would go on for years. But that, you know, the shower scenes, guys getting raped in the showers, man, that's just, a little bit of that it's over the top, man. A lot of that's over the top. So
I remember I interviewed Danny Trejo, who was affiliated, right? And I had heard rumors about this, which he actually confirmed that 10 people died over that movie. Like, the Mexican Mafia was so upset over, like, you know, Edward James Olmos, you know, his character being raped in a juvenile hall, that it just set off a really bad chain of events where 10 people who were consultants got killed. Edward James Olmos had a hit on him for years, to the point where he had to have armed security with him everywhere he went and so forth. So that movie really had serious repercussions.
4 out here and about, I think, 6 in prison.
6 people got killed over American Me.
Yeah, probably about
just being
8.
part of it.
Yeah, but it was funny because I remember Donald Garcia, another Mexican mafia that got out and turned Christian, just straight out said, you know, they were talking about no, and he go, yeah, that falls on you, Eddie, you know. So
okay,
so you've got to be, the power of cinema, you got to be really careful.
Yeah,
you know, wait a minute, and I don't mean, you know, am I offending somebody? No, you just got to be real careful about telling the truth. Okay, the leader of the Mexican Mafia was never raped.
Yeah.
All right, so that's number 1.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, what are you going to tell his kids? You know what I mean? It's like, how do you explain that to his kids? And if you notice, after that movie, the people involved with that movie, the heads, not the actors, okay, because a lot of the actors came to me and asked, Danny, are we in that? No, you guys aren't. You worker bees, you know. And a guy named Eddie Bunker, who was one of Joe Morgan's best friends, and me met actually with Edward and his manager, I guess, at a place called Jerry's Deli in Encino. And I told him out front, you can't do this, Holmes. You can't do this. You're offending some very, very. He said, well, it's theatrical. I said, yeah, but you're not dealing with theatrical motherfuckers.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, it's a lot of times your ego and your will tell you, no, I can get away with this. You know.
Yeah, I looked it up. So Joe Pegleg Morgan.
Joe Pegleg, yeah.
He died in 93.
Yeah.
So from what I heard, there was a price on Edward James Olmos's head over that. That's true.
Yeah. It's funny because I got a letter from some people in Marion, Illinois. I'm not in the Mexican mafia, never have been, right? I know, I grew up with all them guys. We were all in Tracy and Soledad together, but I never joined. Boxing kept me out of everything, you know.
Okay. And how, you said you saved Edward James Olmos's life?
I got a letter from a couple of the guys from Marion, and I read it, and the mistake I made was I got it, and I took it because it said receipt requested, and I got it really. Oh shit! I look at it, Marion, right? And so I read it, and they said, go to my dad. Please talk to my dad. And I'm sorry for this. They apologized to me for involving me, but they had to get this done. So I went to talk to the guy in command. And I remember asking my attorney, Terry Roden, what should I do? And he said, well, would you rather be in trouble with the Mexican mafia or the feds? And I go, well, the feds got rules. He says, well, let's go. So we both went to talk to second in command while Joe was gone. And he said, well, I think, he really disrespected blah, 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 blah. He said, will you go talk to him? Oh, yeah. So he refused to see me. He wouldn't see me.
Edward James Olmos? Okay.
Yeah, it did. I mean, because the Mexican mafia didn't appreciate to be, being portrayed like that. They took that as an insult. This was somebody that they really held in high regard. And to say that he was molested like that and raped, it didn't happen. So that's why. And then, you got to understand these organizations, they move in secrecy. So for these people to start talking about, how this organization functions, some of the people that were involved and identified, they took it personal.
Yeah. Okay, so by 1988, you were 18 years old. That's when you got your first case as an adult.
Right.
What was that particular case about?
That was a robbery. It was a robbery that I caught in the Mission District.
Okay. So you ended up catching this robbery, and then you pled to a 5-year prison sentence?
No, so I caught a robbery in San Francisco, and then I had I want to say it was a vehicle theft, something like that. So I was going back and forth from San Mateo to San Francisco, and the victim in the robbery case didn't want to show up. So what they did was they okey-doked me. When I would get ready to go to court on the robbery, they'd shoot me to San Mateo so that it would give the victim more time to come to court. Eventually, San Mateo ended up cutting me loose. I pled guilty to the auto theft, and as a result, they released me that same day. The same day I got released with a couple guys from the county jail. I ended up robbing those guys that I got released with from the jail. Yeah, man. These guys, I went on a robbery spree, man, from the gate. I robbed them. I took their car. I went to the city. I started robbing people in the city, and I was back in jail by Monday morning. It was like 3 days. I went to court. The bailiff didn't even know that I had got released because I was like, what's going on with my other cases? She was, what are you talking about? They cut me loose in San Mateo. I caught 3 other robberies. And she was like, shit, I don't know nothing about that. So that's when I pled guilty to the robberies. They ran them bow-legged and they gave me 7 years.
Okay, and at that point, you went to San Quentin.
Right.
Is this your first time in a real prison?
It's my first time.
Point?
It's my first time in a real prison, 18 years old.
Right, and San Quentin has quite a reputation.
It does.
What was it like to first step foot in San Quentin as an 18-year-old?
No, I remember getting convicted. I had a good little taste of the county jail. I was there for about 17 months. So, you know, I kind of knew what was expected of me. I knew I was going to be involved in stabbings. I'd done it on the streets. I had stabbed a couple guys in the county jail. I was basically being a bully. But I was showing out. I was trying to show out. I was trying to get my bones. That's what I was doing. And, you know, one of my older homies basically told me, hey, when you get to San Quentin, he's like, you know, the NR is going to approach you. They're going to get at you about making a commitment. And I never heard about the NR. That's the Nuestra Raza. It's a subsidiary gang that the NF created. I mean, I'm going to that. But he told me they're going to get at you, and he told me what to watch for when I get there. You know, he planted that seed. So when I got there, there was some fear driving through I remember being on the bus, and you go through this Sally Port, and then you drive through the yard real slow. And if this is your first time to prison, you're looking at everybody out there. All these guys are on the weight pile. They're on the pull-up bars, and you're sizing everybody up. This is, you know, these are the guys I'm going to be out here with. So, you know, I grew up kind of, you know, I had a rough upbringing. So I wasn't terrified, man. I seen a lot of shit on the streets. It kind of helped prepare me for this. So, you know, when I got there, like I said, there was a level of fear my first time, but as soon as I got off the bus and there was a couple of my homies that were on the weight pile, they called me, hey, Box, what's up, man? And right then I felt comfortable. It was just, I adapted to that environment just that fast. It's like, it ain't so bad, man.
Well, you had a homie there named Rooster.
Yeah.
And was he the one that introduced you to Nuestra Raza?
He was the one that, when I was in the county jail, he's the one that told me, hey, when you get there, they're gonna holler at you about making a commitment. This is something you might want to think about. You're young, you're gonna be gone for a minute. You know, you're striving, you like to bang, you like to gang bang. I think you might excel at that, bro. Think about it. You know, so he planted that seed, like I said, but that was in the county jail.
Okay, but you get to San Quentin and you're already a norteño.
Right.
So what was the transition from norteño to Nuestra Raza?
So, you know, I get there. The first time I make it out to the exercise yard, it's kind of easy to read a yard. You walk out there and you see the blacks in one corner. You got the whites in their little area. The norteños were on the handball court. You got a bunch of, you know, the others had their little area. Everybody's kind of segregated in their little areas, right? And then you got this group of individuals that were like in the far corner that were covered in tattoos, and they were doing burpees. They were doing calisthenics and burpees, and they were doing them. You know, they were in formation, and I knew that was the NR members. So it's just, you know, long story short, I ended up getting approached by one at some point. I made my way to their little area, and it was just through common conversation. It was like, hey, you're out of the city, you know, such and such. Yeah, I was solid homeboy. I was with them in Solano. You know, Big Roach from the Mission. Yeah, you know, I was with them in Folsom. And then, hey, what have you heard about the NR? You know, how would you feel about sacrificing your release date if you had to get off with the Sureños? You know, are you willing to stab somebody? You know, asking questions like that, trying to see where my loyalties were at. And I answered him all the way that I knew he wanted me to answer him. Stabbing somebody, I done it on the street. I'm not tripping off, you know, getting maxed out. I got 7 years. So basically I expressed a desire to make a commitment. And from that point on, they put you on a 90-day probationary period. And that 90-day probationary period is twofold. There's two reasons for it. One is when you're functioning on that 90-day probationary period, or when you're going through it, it gives you an opportunity to see what you're signing up for. You could be asked to do anything that they do in the course of their career. Stab somebody, hold paperwork, hold a weapon, keep security on somebody, whatever they do, as members of that movement. So it gives you an opportunity to see what it's about. And then also, on the other hand, the guys that are recommending you or evaluating you, it gives them an opportunity to see if you're really making that commitment for the right reason. If you're a true believer, or if you're somebody that just wants that status. You just want the title for your own personal gain. They try to weed those dudes out, because the first time they're put in a situation where they're exposed to a little bit of adversity, they're gonna check in. So at the end of that 90 days, they're either gonna tell you, you know what, man, you're not ready. You're not ready. This is not for you. Or I might tell them, hey man, I'm not trying to set myself up for failure. I don't think I'm ready to make that step yet, or I'm ready to go. So they'll either recruit you from that point on, or they won't pull you.
Okay, and after 90 days, you're ready to go.
I was ready to go. I went through the 90-day probationary period, and when I got a ticket, because San Quentin is a reception center. That's not where nobody was gonna stay at that time. You're just coming through. They're gonna send you to a prison where you're gonna do your time at. So I got a ticket to Susanville. I told the guy that was pulling me, I'm gone, bro. They're putting me on a bus to Susanville. I'm about to transpack right now. I'm out of here. And he's like, hey, go over there to the other side to this cell right here and let this guy know he's the one that recruited you. Let him know you're catching a bus and that you're gone. So I went over there, introduced myself, boxer, San Francisco. I'm out of here, bro. Puppet told me to come over here and let you know. And he was like, he told me what his name was. His name was Chocolate from San Jose. He's like, I'm the one that recruited you. Always remember this date right here. It will serve as your birthday. This is a date you're always gonna remember for the rest of your life. And Puppet was your sponsor. When you get to Susanville, don't expose your hand. Just blend in with everybody else, because if you tell them who you are, they're gonna tell on you and get you off the yard. At that time, we were being validated as a disruptive group. So he was just like, just blend in and they'll find you.
Okay, and Nuestra Raza has 14 bonds in terms of how it's laid out. Can you explain what that is?
So the 14 bonds this is everything, the rules and regulations, conduct, discipline, everything that they need to learn in order to function within that movement are in those 14 bonds. How they're to conduct themselves, the things, their expectations, they're all in those 14 bonds. If you're functioning in that movement and you stumble, there's something that you have a question about, you always refer to those bonds and it's in there. And if you live by those bonds, I was always told you'll never go wrong. But that's what it is. There's also a plight that goes with those bonds. So the bonds is everything that you need to know how to function, and the plight is your history, where you came from, where you're going.
Okay. A lot of times when it comes to new recruits, they get sent on missions that the older guys don't want to do themselves,
Right.
as well as seeing how they're going to react. Were you being sent on missions during this time?
When I was younger, yeah. When I was still I was a foot soldier.
What do you think were the most violent missions that you were sent on?
Stabbings. There was multiple stabbings that I was involved in. I went through the Cork and Shoe Wars, where we were going out. I'm sure it was all over the media, where we were going out they were putting us out there on the yard with, guys that they knew we were mortal enemies with the Sureños, with the ABs. And we go out there, we get shot, and we keep on going out. We kept on fighting. Those things, I went through the shoe wars. I went through a couple stabbings. So, there were things I was doing on the streets as well.
Okay. Were you caught doing any of these stabbings or any of these fights? Because usually that extends your time, right? If you get caught.
Right. I mean, a couple of them I did. The objective is always to get away if you can. You're gonna stab somebody, you do it in a blind spot. You do it where hopefully nobody's gonna tell on you. Where you're not, they got gun rails where there's guards up there that are watching. You always try to do it and get away. But sometimes, like the stabbings I caught were on the exercise yards where it's a small yard, the gunner's right on top of you, they're gonna see you do it. So you gotta get it in and try to be as fast as you can about it, and they're gonna see you. So, I'd stab them 4 or 5 times, or however many times. They start shooting at you, and then everybody would prone out on the ground, and you get written up. And if they got the weapon and it was a bad stabbing, then they'd pick up a case on you.
Well, you said that the rapes in American Me weren't realistic, but rape does happen in these types of prisons.
Oh, definitely.
In terms of what you saw and what you heard about, how did it actually work in there?
A lot of times dudes that are getting taken advantage of in there, if you act like a punk, you're gonna get treated like a punk. But, guys being in the shower and this whole thing about dropping the soap, man, that it's overrated. If you got 2 cellies in a cell and, you got a weak individual that's in the cell and he's getting taken advantage of, it's gonna happen. That's how it does happen. But, this whole concept of somebody getting caught somewhere by itself and 4 or 5 dudes coming in and pinning you down and taking it, that shit don't happen. If it does, it's not on a level where it just happens a lot.
Okay, so you do your time, and then at one point you get out. How old were you when you get out from doing this particular bid?
22.
Okay. So you get out at 22, and you go right back into crime.
Right back in.
Right. You start doing robberies right away.
Right. Well, let me say this. So when you're paroling and you're an NR member at that time, 6 months to the house, you make a commitment to either continue to function beyond the walls of prison, out on the streets with the NR, or you tell them, now, you know what, I want to go back to just doing what I do. I got a family out there. I'm good, man. So you have that option. You had that option back then. I elected to continue functioning. So when I got out, there was a crew out there in San Francisco that were out there, involved in criminal activities, robberies at that time. We were out there we were involved in all kind of stuff, counterfeiting, extortion.
Okay. What kind of extortion were you doing during that time?
Like an extortion. So you might have a business, a mom and pop business in the Mission District. And, we might push up on them and tell them that if they're required to pay so much, otherwise something's gonna happen to their business. It'll get burnt down. Somebody might come back and do something to them. That's one form of extortion. And then being out there forcing people in our, areas that we consider our territory to pay to sell their dope out there, kickbacks, that kind of stuff.
Well, you yourself, you're Mexican?
I'm Mexican, Puerto Rican, yeah.
Okay. And most of these stores that you were extorting and so forth, were they Mexican owned as well?
We always do that, man. We always shit in our own backyards, man. Instead of going out of the hood into the suburbs, we always tear up our own neighborhoods. But yeah, that's what we were doing.
Now that you're older, when you think about that, you're essentially terrorizing your own people.
Yeah.
Does that bother you a little bit?
It does. It does. When I reflect back on it now, I see the things that I was doing, but that's what I was involved in at that time,
Yeah. Well, right when you get out during that time, you end up getting a girl pregnant.
Yeah.
Okay. And she had the baby, but you really weren't involved in the baby's life at all.
No, I figured it was better for me to fall back, man. You know, I didn't want to be a part-time father. I didn't want, you know, have a son that was gonna come up and have to visit me through a plate glass window. So, you know, my thing was, I was looking at it was I was doing him a favor. His mom raised him. She raised him good. She was a Christian, and he grew up as a Christian. So he was away from all that stuff. And I just didn't want to expose him to that. So I made a decision not to be a part of his life.
I mean, in retrospect, you didn't have a dad in your own life. And things probably would have worked out differently if you had an active father who, you know, took a role in your upbringing. And then you go and repeat the cycle yourself. Does that somewhat bother you at this point?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it was a direct result of what I got involved in. You know, it does though. It probably wasn't the right decision, but because I was involved in the things that I was, yeah, like you said, I continued that cycle.
Okay, so you're out on the street, but then by 1993, you end up going back to prison again.
Right.
So what happened that led up to that?
93, I want to say I caught a robbery. I was out there still, that was my thing, robberies. I got addicted to doing robberies. The money was fast. So the thing about San Francisco, though, is it used to be one of the most liberal cities in Northern California. I used to catch robberies, dead bang, in the act, weapon with the victim, and they would just kick the case out. Time after time, I would catch these cases, and because we were on parole, all they would do is just, you know what, this guy's on parole, they're probably gonna give him a year, just fucking drop the case, put him on a bus, get him up out of here. That's what they used to do.
Okay, but you get caught and then you get sent back to prison. Was that, you caught a year at that point?
12 flat, yeah, 12 months flat.
Okay, so now you go back to prison again. And which prison were you at this time?
So what I didn't say is before I left prison, so when I was in Susanville, I caught a group stabbing. Basically, there was a bunch of shit going on in the yard. There were a lot of sureños out there. I got involved in a group stabbing. 7 of us, we got weapons, knives, and we went into a chow hall and we stabbed a bunch of sureños. And as a result of that, they opened up a validation packet on all of us that were involved. They said, you know, it was a conspiracy. This was a planned assault. So when they validate you, they take you off the main lines and they put you in a SHU program. It's like a prison inside of a prison. You're locked in the cell 23 hours a day. You come out maybe a half hour every other day. You come out for a shower, but you're locked in. You're considered a threat to the safety and security of the institution. So I'm validated now. Every time I come back to prison, I go back to the SHU program. So when I went back to San Quentin, because I'm validated, right off the bus, John Mendoza, where you at? They come in, get me off the bus, throw me in a cage, and take me to the hole.
Okay, so now you're in another prison, and this one is actually, there's like 5 yards. There's the integrated, the Northern Mexican and Northern Black, Southern Mexican and white, and 2 Crip yards.
That was actually still San Quentin at that time.
Oh, that was San Quentin?
Yeah, but that's how the yards were set up right there with death row.
Okay, and Stanley Tukey Williams was at this particular prison, right?
Yes, he was.
Did you know each other at all?
It was my neighbor over there.
Okay, so what was Tukey like? Because he's kind of a very mythical figure in the world of Crips.
Tukey was a good dude, man. I know a lot of people, because of the case and because of what he got convicted for, they look at him in a different light. I mean, gotta understand, me going to prison and then being around these guys, some of these guys you meet on death row, and absent of the crimes they committed, they're good people, man. He seemed like a good dude. He was somebody I used to converse with, you know, on a daily basis, obviously being my neighbor. Smart, intelligent, very articulate, engaging. He was just a good dude.
Right. I mean, he got put to death, I think, in 2005 by lethal injection. And from what I heard, he was so muscular that they kept breaking needles on his arm. But leading up to that, I believe he won a Nobel Peace Prize, right?
He did.
Yeah. So he really was churning Well, he had turned his life around and he was trying to really influence things in the positive direction, but because he had that murder hanging over his head, he ended up getting the death penalty.
I don't think it had nothing to do with that, Vlad. I honestly think it was political because Tookie was supposedly he was the leader of the Crips. And, you know, they say he started that whole movement, the gang, the Crips. And it you know, the way that they were looking at it was like, you know, this epidemic, or they were trying to say was like, you know, this movement that he started, it's nationwide now, and here's the leader, and he didn't want to debrief. You know, he wanted to maintain his standards as a man and not, you know, give up his gang. You know, he didn't want to talk about his gang business with them. So I think it had a lot to do with that. I think if he would have debriefed and he would have denounced his gang membership and did all that, because he was doing everything else right. He was trying to change kids' lives. He wrote all those books. He got the Nobel Peace Prize, but it's too political.
Okay, so you do your year and then you come out again, I think in 1994.
Right.
Okay, and once again, you get right back into crime again.
Right back into it again.
I mean, at that point, you're going in and out, in and out, in and out, stabbings, fights, you know, all this violence. I mean, was there any hint of, man, maybe I should just leave this alone and go get a square job and, you know what I'm saying? Just like put this behind me because, you know, I mean, you're 24, but you've lived, you know, 3 lifetimes worth of violence and so forth at this point. Was there any hint of this during that time?
No, because you got to understand, every time I went back to prison, I was getting indoctrinated more on this belief system. I was being brainwashed into believing that this organization that I had committed myself to was a righteous organization, and the things that we were fighting for, struggling for, it was a righteous cause. So I wanted to continue to function or be a part of this criminal organization. And I was striving to be, you know, more than what I was at that time. At that time, I was just an NR member, but I wanted to become an NF member. There was no sense in me stopping at that point. I wanted to see it through and basically elevate as much as I could.
Okay. Because then you get sent back to San Quentin again in 95?
Yeah.
And that's when you found out that your girlfriend gave birth to a baby?
Yeah, that's when my daughter was born, yeah.
What was it like being in San Quentin and finding out that you have a baby on the outside that you can't see?
I mean, it was tough. You know, obviously I knew that she was pregnant, and obviously I knew she was pregnant, and I wanted to be out there for the birth of my daughter. And I almost made it, but I ended up catching a violation for some stupidity. But you know, being there on the tier, I knew around when her, you know, what her date was when she was supposed to have the baby, and I'm there doing my thing in Quentin, and I remember the chaplain came up and slid me a little note, said, you know, 8-pound baby girl with her name, and you know what I mean? Obviously I was happy as a father, but it was kind of tough being in there, not being a part of the birth and not being there to see her. So yeah, it was tough, man.
Well, you said around that time, a lot of Norteños began dropping out and walking away. And you said inevitably this is the beginning stages of the self-destructing process.
Right.
Can you explain that?
So I want to say it was around 95, 96, I started to see a shift in the organization. I seen something was changing because when I came to prison, there was like one dropout, you know, somebody that walked away from the gang. There was like literally 1 or 2 dropouts in the entire block. By 96, something was happening at the top that was discouraging a lot of Norteños. They were, what it was is the NR started to turn on the Norteños. They started to bully them. Whether it was over females, drugs, personality clashes, whatever it was, they started to abuse these guys. They were stabbing them. They were, you know, having them do some foul shit out there on the main lines. And a lot of these guys were getting discouraged to the point that they were like, you know what, I'm good, man. And so they were dropping out. And, you know, by then in 94, what we kind of missed is that's when I was recruited as an NF member in San Quentin. And, you know, now I'm an NF member. We started to target the NR members. We're trying to weed out these guys, the bad, you know, the rogue NR members that are victimizing the Norteños. So it was just like a big internal war that was going on. These guys are walking away. These guys are getting stabbed. They're getting removed. So there was a lot going on.
Okay, so how did you go from NR to NF during that time?
So in San Quentin in 94, I was there on a violation. I'm striving. You know, by then I had absorbed a lot of schooling. I was starting to show some, you know, potential as being a leader. I was starting to basically transform into a leader. They seen those qualities in me. And when I was there was a guy named Mikeo from Salinas and Big Smiley from Salinas. They approached me about making a commitment. These guys, there was a couple other guys that they were recruiting at the same time. So it was kind of similar to the NR, but it was a different kind of commitment. So they put you on a 90-day probationary period, the same thing. The schooling is a lot more intensive. But now instead of asking if, you know, I'm willing to stab somebody or if I'm willing to catch some more time, now they're asking me things like, if you have a child that's on his deathbed, you know, and the organization calls you, you got to be willing to walk away from that child, abandon that child on his deathbed and come to your brothers. I'm being asked things like, you know, are you willing to kill your own flesh and blood if it comes down to it? And I understood what that meant. A lot of the times we have sisters, mothers, family members that we use to maybe facilitate information or to hold drugs or hold weapons. They're the ones that we trust. And maybe in the course of doing that, my little sister tells on somebody, now she becomes a target. So I might be the only one that can get to her. I might be the only one that knows where she's at. So, you know, that's when my loyalty will I'm either gonna take her out or I'm gonna alert her, you know, obviously. So that's when I made the commitment in 94. And that's when I became, you know, an NF member. And now I'm a leader now, basically.
Well, I remember in the movie American Me, near the end of the movie, one of the, you know, Mexican mafia guys, Puppet, was essentially told to kill his little brother, Little Puppet, because he had messed up and put the leader in, you know, in a situation to get sent back to jail and so forth. And he had to go and do it. I mean, are there situations being an NF member where you have to kill your own family member and so forth?
Yeah, there is. I'm fortunate that I was never put in that situation. And I can sit here and tell you straight up that I'm glad I never was, because at that time I was so deeply entrenched in that lifestyle that if I would have been put in a situation like that, I think I honestly would have made a big mistake, man, because I really wanted to show these guys that I was loyal and I was willing to do anything to do it. And there's a lot of guys that get put in that position. Some of them, they check in. Some of them, they'll end up killing their own flesh and blood, their own family, brother, sister. I've actually been a part of a situation like that. It's in my book where we told this guy that we were gonna kill his mom because his mom turned into an informant. And, you know, obviously he knows that he's in this situation. We're telling him we're gonna kill her. And obviously he's not gonna say, you know, I'm not on board with that. He understood what was going on. So he was like, you know what, if you guys feel like it's in the best interest of the O to take her out, I'm with it, bro. You know what I'm saying? I understand. But he ended up disappearing. Obviously, he had second thoughts about it after, you know, we talked to him, and he ended up disappearing. But we ended up catching up with his mom, and we ended up killing her later on.
Were you involved in that?
I was involved to an extent.
Okay. I don't want to potentially
I was involved. I was involved as much as I told you as far as the initial conversation.
Yeah, I don't want to potentially put you in a situation where you catch a murder case. So you're okay with saying this?
Yeah, my involvement was sitting him down, talking to him, and letting him know that his mom was in a bad situation.
Got it. Okay, so in 1996, you get out again.
Right.
And once again, back to the life of crime. And there was a situation that happened with a box cutter.
Yeah.
Explain that.
So I imagine, well, there was actually a few of them, but I think the one you're talking about is, there were some sureños that I had seen outside of the place I was staying at that time on 16th and Cap. And I got into an argument with my daughter's mom, and I walked out the house and I seen these guys across the street, and I basically went over there and I identified them as sureños. So I jumped on one of them. We started fighting. He didn't know I had the box cutter. I hit him with the box cutter, and at first I thought I missed him. But, when I punched him, his head went back, his neck opened up. And that's when he seen blood. And then he kneels down, and his boy tried to come at me. I ended up chasing him through, if you're familiar with that area, there's a Walgreens right there and a Craigan's. But anyway, he gets away. And, that's basically what happened with that incident.
Okay, the guy whose throat you cut, he survived?
They left. I would imagine he probably did, but they ended up leaving. I was thinking that when that happened, the police were actually called that night, and I don't know where they came from, but they chased me into my daughter's into her mom's apartment. I ran out the back door, ran downstairs. They came in, they were like, "We know he's on parole. We know that he was involved in that incident." I never heard nothing about it. Those guys disappeared. I don't know where they went, what hospital they went to, but they left. So I don't think that they made contact with the cops. I was thinking the next morning I was in trouble. I had to send my daughter's mom across the street to talk to the employees in Craig and find out what these cops said or how bad it is. But nobody knew nothing. They knew an incident had happened, but nothing really came of it.
Okay, so you get arrested. And technically that would have been your third strike.
Right.
But you got lucky.
Right.
And you got a 4-year plea deal.
Correct.
Okay, so now you're back in prison once again. Now, what prison are you in at this point?
I go through San Quentin. Again, every time I go back, I always go through San Quentin because that's the reception center. But I go through Quentin, I'm either going to Corcoran or Pelican Bay now because I'm validated.
Okay, and so you go back to prison, and by 1997, there's this huge investigation into the Nuestra Familia.
Right.
So tell me about this.
So the investigation you're talking about is called Operation Black Widow. And what it was a 5-year federal investigation. And the whole purpose of the investigation was the feds had this plan to indict NF leadership on a federal indictment. These guys, most of them were doing life. And they figured, you know what, if we indict the leadership and have their sentences commuted to federal prison, we'll disperse them throughout the nation in different prisons, different USPs across the nation. And this will break the organization, which it didn't do that. It actually ended up helping the NF because these guys are recruiting machines. So it helped. We were never able to metastasize outside of the state of California. We were never able to do that like the Mexican mafia. But now you got these guys in federal prison. They start recruiting now. Now it's no longer California's problem. They got regiments popping up in Colorado, Florida, Kansas City. So that's what the investigation was about.
Well, right. You had mentioned in your book that 22 NF members and associates got indicted, which seems kind of a low number considering this is a 5-year, multi-million-dollar, investigation.
Right. Well, there was a lot of unindicted co-conspirators. Their whole thing was they were just going after the top, the upper echelon, the leaders. That's who they were focused on. There would be other investigations that would come later, but they could have indicted a lot more people, like you said. They could have kept it going, but those were the top members right there.
Okay, so at this point, what is your ranking in NF?
And what year are we in right now? 96?
96, 97, 98. Because you get transferred to Corcoran in 99, right?
Right.
So leading up, because you get out in 2004. So leading up to 2004, what's your ranking in the NF?
By then I was a Cat 2. I was a Category 2. So the NF has a category system. Cat 1s are the guys that are just coming in. They're really uneducated. They're learning still. The Cat 2 are guys that know the Constitution, the NF Constitution. It's kind of like the 14 bonds for the NR, but this is the NFs. They call it the Bible. And these guys are they're a lot more educated than the Cat 1s. They've shown that they can break down the Constitution in the correct form. And these guys are the ones that are usually going to get out and become regimental commanders on the streets. And then you got Cat 3s. That's the management level. These guys they're the leadership. It's the spit and shine. They're the ones they're the backbone of the organization.
Okay, so you get out in 2004, and now you're back on the streets. You're in San Jose at this point, right?
Right.
Okay, and at this point, you start moving drugs.
Yeah, well, the way it happened was in 93, I discharged off parole. For the first time in my adult life, I got off parole. So I'm in touch with NF leadership at that time. Operation Black Widow's still going on. The leadership they had him in I think it's called the McGuire facility over there in Oakland. And, putting them right in the middle of Northern California gave us access at visiting with these guys. So because I was in contact with them, I went back up to Ukiah. I had met a female up there in Ukiah. I got with her. I was just gonna, there was a lot going on at that time. I was just gonna fade out. Go up to Ukiah, get a job, just kind of kick back. Everybody's getting indicted. You got people flipping, other people getting, telling on other people. People were getting caught up. So there was a lot going on. But leadership, they basically directed me to move to Santa Clara County to establish that regiment out there. They told me, we need you to relocate to San Jose to start a regiment out there, because everybody that had been functioning in that regiment got indicted. They all got indicted. So they wanted me to go out there, find the stragglers, get everything back up and running, start generating money again.
Okay, and you're focusing on heroin at this point?
No, at that time, heroin was selling out there, but everybody was buying crystal at that time.
Okay. How much money was being made off of the drug operation at its height during this time?
So in San Jose, you got to remember, by this time, I had functioned throughout the years. At one time in Sonoma County, I was a regimental commander out there. Another time in San Francisco. For a brief time, I went out to Salinas. I was a regimental commander out there. By this time, I'm good at what I'm doing. Leadership takes they notice that I'm good at getting these regiments up and running. That's all I've been doing every time I hit the streets. So within 4 months, I was able to put a crew together. There was 20 guys that were under me at that time. We ended up hooking up with somebody that was part of the Gulf Cartel. We had a shitload of dope. I had the manpower. We basically combined resources. And at the peak of it, we were probably moving around 60 pounds a month between 20 of us. You gotta understand, some of my guys were good at moving 2 or 3 pounds a week. Then you got your half-pound guys, your quarter-pound ounces, all the way down to teeners and 8 balls. Collectively, it adds up. So we were doing a lot. Plus, I had a huge counterfeiting operation going on out there where I was washing $5 bills and making 50s and 100s. And we were involved in all kind of other shit.
Okay. I mean, I'd interviewed one of the big counterfeiters, who got busted. And he kind of described the process using inkjet printers, and he kind of described how a printer can't actually print money.
Not no
so
more.
You'd have to do it. You'd have to do it in layers. You'd have to print like one layer of it, then put it back in, do another layer, and he even said that he had found that the best paper for counterfeit is Bible paper. You know how every Bible has like some empty sheets like in the beginning for notes, that he would basically just go into Walmart's and just steal Bible paper and then go home and make money out of it.
I basically took a photo of like $100 bill so I could upload the photo to the computer to get around scanning it. And then to get around the printer from not printing it, I would layer the images, separate, just the background color and all the black work and the seals and serial numbers and everything. I'd break it down into multiple layers so I could print one layer at a time. That way the printer would allow me to print them. And yeah, I was looking for like thin paper to sandwich two sheets together. And like I said, I knew in that book, I believe he used telephone book paper because it marked with the counterfeit pens properly. But like I could just never get that to work, I guess. I tried that like newsprint stuff. But like it usually has like a darker grayish tint to newsprint. So that's why I believe he was using a press, I think, to color it. And I was just had inkjet printers to work with at the time. So I was looking for thin paper. I come across Bible paper, which ended up being like perfect in every way. So like real money glows in a black light, a dull purple, which like all other papers are bleached in the manufacturing process. So it like glows a bright blue, like a fluorescent blue. So I found out that some forms of Bible paper glow that dull purple just like money. And it's thin enough to sandwich two sheets together and opaque enough to where I could print a strip and a watermark on the back of one side, sandwich them together, and you couldn't see the strip and watermark through the face of the bill, but you could see it if I held it up to the light, you know what I mean? So basically Bible paper just worked perfectly for everything I needed it to. I started basically just with like the Bibles lying around my house kind of thing to test the stuff out. And I found out how well it worked. So as I was doing it, I progressively started printing more and more, you know what I mean? So at first it was just kind of, going into bookstores, opening up a Bible. There's normally 2, 3, 4. Some Bibles have 20 or 40 blank pages in the back because it'll say like notes at the top, so you can study Bibles and stuff. So yeah, I just go into certain bookstores and kind of just rip out the blank pages and do it that way.
How were you guys counterfeiting?
At that time, they didn't start putting, I know what you're talking about. There's like, you can't see it with the naked eye, but they started putting these things on the bills to where you couldn't print them. You would put it in the printer and it would only print like half the bill and would stop. So it was something that they did to these. We were using Lexmark's printers and we make a template. We washed the bills first, obviously, using that degreaser, that purple, it comes in a purple bottle. Then, we have just the paper once all the ink comes off, and then we make a template, put the bills on there. It's a meticulous process, but you flip the bill, do the front, then you got to flip it over, do the back. But it works. It used to pass the pen test. I would go in stores and they would take because it's on real paper. It's on money. It's money. So at that time, they didn't have a lot of the things that they did now to stop all that. It's a little bit harder now.
Well, was it around that time that you thought that the NF put a hit on you?
Around that time?
Yeah.
No, there was no reason for me to it didn't happen like that. No, I think what you might be talking about is when they came to search me, when everything kind of went down. Is that what you're talking about?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so when they came, by then I got into a shootout out in San Jose that got me under an investigation, and that's kind of what got everything started. I found the GPS tracking devices under my cars, me and my second in command, and I knew everything was coming to an end. But so they raided my house on June 11, 2004. They raided the house. When they were coming in, the whole house started shaking. I knew that it could only be one of three things. Either somebody was trying to come in and rob me, somebody had told on me, or the NF sent a squad to come take me out. And I hadn't done nothing. I didn't do nothing wrong. But I've been playing this game long enough to understand that even guys that do everything right, righteously give, show loyalty to this organization, it's cutthroat politics, man. Somebody could be pushing an agenda, and next thing you know, they're whacking you behind something you didn't even do. That's how, their politicking is just a little bit better, you know what I mean? And that's what ends up happening. But obviously it wasn't that. I was getting raided. Somebody told on me.
What was that shootout over?
The shootout was when I was told to move to San Jose. I didn't know the area that I moved in. It was a fucking Sureño neighborhood. It was like one of their strongholds. I would find out later that I was right in the middle of a Sureño neighborhood on Impala out there in Campbell. And something happened a couple days before where something happened in front of my apartment that led to them coming back, knocking out all my windows. I get a call from my girl. She's screaming like they're fucking breaking all the windows. They're trying to get in. I get there, they're gone. I knew they were coming back. I replaced all the windows, and I basically had like 15 guns in that apartment. Then I had an apartment next door to mine with 2 NR members and another 15 guns. How many? There was a lot of guns in there. It was overkill. I had to put a gun on every window sill, one on the kitchen table, one on the living room table. They ended up coming through. So we ended up getting to a shootout, and that's what led to me being investigated. I left, I grabbed the money, grabbed my girl, and they found a bunch of kites, a bunch of things that led them to believe that I was involved in criminal activity.
Okay, so you got arrested again over that whole situation.
Right.
Okay, so where do you go back to now? Which prison?
That's game over from that point. 2004, they got me, that was it. I'm a 3-striker. I just got raided by several agencies. I'm the main target in that investigation. So they told me when they raided my house, we know what you're doing. We know you're running a NF regiment out here. We know your second in command is. I had a limousine business that I was using as a front to clean the money through. I was running the dope money through the business, money laundering. I had all kind of stuff going on. And, I stayed in the county jail for 10 years fighting this case.
Well, right, because you were facing 155 years to life.
Correct, that's correct.
Which is that's just a crazy concept. 155 to life. That means that if you do your 155 years, you might still get life after that.
I might have been able to do half of that, but I don't think I would have been able to do the whole 155, man. Yeah.
Right, no one can do 155 years. Okay, how much fear did that strike in your heart, knowing that this is it, strike 3, life in prison?
I mean, honestly, when I signed up for the NF, I knew that this day was coming. I was told that before I made my commitment. The guy that pulled me was like, this lifestyle, it ain't for everybody. There's only 2 things that are gonna happen to you. You're either gonna spend the rest of your life in prison, or you're gonna die trying to push this organization's, advancement forward. So I knew that day was coming. I just always hoped that it would come later than sooner. So nobody wants to spend the rest of their life in prison, but I was at peace with it, man. When they came and got me, I knew that I was in trouble. My girl was there when they raided the house at that time, and I told them right there, hey, everything that you find in here, I'll take it on the chin. It's all mine. She don't got nothing to do with anything going on here. The dope, it's all mine, the weapons. So my thing was just to cut her loose. I'd always told her I'd never let her get caught up. That was my lifestyle. So I buried myself. I was a 3-striker, and I knew I was basically locking myself down on a life commitment. a life sentence.
Yeah, I remember I interviewed this one Mexican rapper named Sad Boy Loco, who was gang affiliated. And I remember one of the things that struck me was he said that as a kid, he aspired to be a shot caller and do life in prison as a gang leader.
Yeah, I seen that.
And at that time, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
And at that time, that seemed like totally logical to him. As an adult, he understands that that's crazy.
When you're a youngster, your dream is to hit Pelican Bay and all that stuff, you feel me? But as you become older and like you have kids and shit, and you have homies that are already there, or, you know what I mean? And see what it really is, you kind of change your views in life and shit. Like, I got homies that are doing life sentences right now, like 3-4 life sentences on top of their head.
Were a lot of people in your circle thinking the same way? Like, oh, you know, my aspiration is to be a leader of the NF and be in solitary confinement 23 hours a day and never see anything, but I'm still a leader and I'm still a shot caller.
Yes, as stupid as it sounds, that's part of that lifestyle. It comes with the territory. I mean, a lot of guys look at prison as a means to get like the credibility that, you know, once you've been in the joint, especially like the shoot programs, you have that credibility. That's something that, you know, helps give them status. So, yeah, I don't think, you know, with all due respect to Sad Boy, I don't think I ever aspired to do life in prison, but I wanted to be a shot caller. I wanted to be a part of that gang lifestyle, but I understood that came with the territory.
Well, by this time, when you're sitting in county fighting a case, you are the rank of overall authority.
Correct.
Explain what that means.
That means I ran that entire county jail, and at that time, because I was in the county of Santa Clara, San Jose, I was still running the streets. The cops that arrested me, you know, was the funny thing about it is when they walked me into that county jail, they walked me in like a dirty trophy. I was flocked by agents from the Department of Justice, and it was dramatic, man. They walked me through the whole intake process. You know, I got stripped out, did my fingerprints. They took pictures of me, and then they advised gang intel in that county jail. They're like, this guy's got too much influence with the Norteños. Put him in an observation cell, keep him away from the rest of the Norteños in the county jail. So they put me in an observation cell. That's what they tried to do when I first got there.
Okay, but you're still a shot caller and you're still, you know, telling people to do things,
Right.
even in this position.
Right.
You know, in your book, you said, you know, you would order beatings or worse to anyone that was on the gang's bad news list.
That's correct.
What would happen if you gave an order to one of your soldiers and they said, I don't want to do it?
Oh, they get removed. They get stabbed. You give a direct order to somebody, especially coming from an NF member, it's not an option. There's no choice about it. They either do it or they don't. They don't, there's consequences.
Right. I remember in the movie American Me when they end up killing, you know, like the Mexican mafia killed one of their own guys while he was bench pressing. And they said how that kind of set shockwaves around the prison because all the other prisoners saw that these guys would kill their own if necessary.
Yeah.
But this was sort of normal operation for you guys.
It was, yeah. And a lot of times those kind of examples are made to send a message to the rest of the organization. That's what strikes fear in people. You know, make no mistake about it, from the top to the bottom, anybody can get touched, you know, if you violate these laws. That's happened with a lot of guys that I know. Matter of fact, the guy that pulled me, that recruited me, was a part of Operation Black Widow. He was one of the victims that got murdered out there in San Jose.
Wow. Okay. So you're sitting here fighting this case, you know, facing life in prison. But at that time, your wife ends up catching lupus.
No, she actually had lupus. The birth of her son actually triggered her lupus from the time she was 18. So when I met her, she had already had it. She was in her 30s. She'd already had it for quite some time, and she had already had like I want to say 2 or 3 open heart surgeries. They were replacing her valve, one of the valves in her heart that kept on degenerating. Yeah.
Okay. So there ended up being a phone call between you and her, which ended up changing your whole life.
Several phone calls, several.
Okay. Tell me what happened.
So I hit the jail. They put me in the observation cell. The thing that I didn't really explain to is that I continued to struggle with my addiction my entire life, even when I became an NF member. And even though the NF forbids any kind of drug use, I was still doing it. And it's common. There's a lot of leaders that still do it. They just do it in the privacy of their own home where nobody knows about it, but it happens. So I went in there with a monster habit. I knew I was gonna get arrested. I seen everything kind of closing in on me. So I was killing myself with that shit. I was shooting 5 outfits full. 5 every time I would fix, I would pump them into my legs. And so I went to the county jail with a monster habit. Anyways, I get there, I'm kicking. My girl, my mom, they both know I'm in a bad situation. I'm looking at all this time. I just got raided. They know I'm a 3-striker. And they're broken up about it. You know, this is the first time they've ever spoken on my affiliations. My mom's like, you know what? You need to think about your family for once. I never spoke on that shit, but if you're gonna go spend the rest of your life in prison, she's like, you don't even need to call here no more. You know, she's like, they can be your family. You know, your girl needs you out there. She's dying. She's got lupus. So, you know, at first when they started talking like this, I knew the phones were recorded and I would just kind of brush it off, man. But my mom started getting in my girl's head. If he doesn't do it, you know, he don't love you and, you know, you got to get through to him. He's about to make a bad decision and he's going to, you know, spend the rest of his life in prison. So eventually, to keep my girl pacified, stress is a killer for lupus. If they start stressing out, it will kill him. It'll speed it up. So I started telling my girl, whatever I got to do, whenever they would bring up this conversation, I would tell them, if that's what I got to do to get back home to you, that's what I'm going to do. But let me fight my case. So those conversations right there, even though they were just conversations I was having between them two, and I really had no intention on doing it, that right there there was nothing I could do. It would end up catching up with me later.
Okay, so all the jail calls are recorded. So the authorities got these jail calls of you saying, I'll cooperate in order to get out of prison, right?
Correct.
And what do? They took those jail calls and played them to other NF members?
No, so what ends up happening is these guys, they're trying to proposition me, this agency that arrested me. They've been trying to proposition me for about a good year and a half. They kept trying to come up to the county jail and I kept telling them, I'm not going to talk to you guys, man, you know, and they kept on trying to, you know, loyalty only goes so far, you know, think about your life and you know, I kept telling them, man, you guys are wasting your time. And it was almost like they were getting upset that I wouldn't cooperate with them. They were like, you know what? Well, something big's gonna come and hit you in the chest and you're gonna go down with all your homeboys in. What are you gonna make you guys act like you're gonna give me the death penalty or something? I'm already looking at life, man. So do what you gotta do. So they did what they had to do. They ended up indicting me. They indicted me with all my co-defendants. And what they did was, in short, the DA, he played his hand the way he was supposed to. They knew I wasn't going to cooperate. So what they did was, you know what? Let's release the phone calls and all boxers, homies are going to find out how he's been talking on the phone. There was no relevance to those phone calls. They weren't relevant to the case. Nobody was getting implicated. They put them out there so that everybody could hear how I was talking. And they knew what was going to happen. This will cause some internal, you know, conflict for him, and maybe he'll end up falling in bad standings and he'll come crawling back to us and we'll have him eating out the palm of our hand. That was their whole objective.
Okay, but what happens?
So they released me and that's what happens. It starts, you know, some of my co-defendants hear about it. I go into damage control and I'm like, look, man, you guys know my girl's She's dying. This is why I said what I said. I understood that as a leader, I'm going to be held to different standards because I know better. But I told him, look, there's never going to be a police report coming out. There's no paperwork. I haven't talked to nobody. I've let you guys know every time they've tried to talk to me, but there's nothing that ever come out there. As a leader, I didn't want to create a power struggle in that county jail. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to relinquish my position. I'll step back. You guys go ahead, take the jail over and just let the case play out. But I haven't talked to these guys, man. But, at the end of the day, it fell on deaf ears, man. They started pushing an agenda. The NF doesn't care about my lady, her lupus. They don't care. All they're going to look at is you compromised your integrity over a female. That's how they're going to look at it. And you got no business talking like that. And I knew better. But this was my wife. She was dying, so I would do it again. Does it really matter what I say, to her? I could say anything to her, but is it happening? It's not happening. But again, it fell on deaf ears. So I would fight that for about a good 2 years. I got into it with the homies. I'm fighting, them thinking that I'm telling, and never once did I sit down with law enforcement. And another NF member comes to the county jail. He understands the situation I'm in. He helps me get back on an active tier. I'm back with the fellas now. I'm programming another 17 months. There's no paperwork, but somebody pushed another agenda. A guy that I had an issue with, he pushed another agenda, and he basically led them to believe up in Pelican Bay leadership. He led them to believe that he was in possession of something that basically confirmed that I was telling when it wasn't. All he was talking about was my phone calls that were transcribed. Had he told them it's the phone calls that are transcribed, they would have been like, we know about that already. But it got the wheels rolling anyway. They tried to put a green light on me. It was sorry. Somebody tried to act like they were gonna stab me or spear me. Didn't even have a tip on it. These guys, later on, I would find out they didn't even want to do it, but they all got put in a bad situation. It was either them or me. So, at that point, I kind of knew it was over, man. They walked me off the tier. I go back to an observation cell.
Okay, because you have NF tattooed on the back of your head?
I had it tattooed on the back of my head. It's covered up now. I got an Aztec bird.
Right. So at that point, how many years have you been an active gang member?
At that point, about 28 years at that point.
So like 2/3 of your life.
Yeah.
Pretty much your entire, well, you started before you were an adult. You started as a teenager, essentially. So
right.
Most of the life that you remember was a gang member, whether it was a Norteño, NF, or NR, but it's all sort of interrelated, so you were always on this side. How did it feel to suddenly say, you're not welcome in this gang anymore?
It's all, like you said, it's all I knew. I couldn't make that decision. I was, this is, again, it's all I knew. So, it's a bad feeling, man. When you're part of an organization that you're willing to die for, and have given all your life for this organization, and you don't get the benefit of the doubt. That's all I was asking for. Give me the fucking benefit of the doubt to show you that, let the case play out, man. You know what I mean? If the police reports come out, at the end of the day, it was almost like I was telling these guys how to treat me. Let the case play out, man. When everything's over and said, deal with the trash then. But it'll never come out. But it's the worst feeling, man. It's like somebody dying. You know what I mean? It's like somebody dying in your life, man. I had a lot of love for the fellas, and I still do. I know people don't understand that, but there's a lot of boys that I'm still in contact with that are still part of that lifestyle, that they're like, man, our bonds were bigger than that,
How did it feel to have an actual green light on you by the gang that you essentially devoted your entire life and was willing to risk your freedom for the rest of your life to support?
It was messed up. I felt messed up, man. Again, it's betrayal. It's betrayal. I made a commitment. I committed my life to them, but they made a commitment to me as well. And the way I was looking at it is they didn't hold up on their end. There's something that's called the, due process. Even in the most egregious situations, you're supposed to be given the benefit of the doubt. I wasn't given that. That's all I was asking for. So yeah, it's a messed up feeling, especially when you really believe in that shit.
So at the point that there was a green light on you and there was an attempt on your life, did you then proceed to fully cooperate with the police?
No. There wasn't really an attempt on my life. Somebody had a spear and was acting like they just basically did it in front of the COs to get me off the tier. I didn't really feel like there was a real threat at that point. I knew that, hitting the streets or eventually going to prison, those kind of things happen, But in that jail, I didn't feel there was a real attempt on my life. But I couldn't get myself over that hump, man. I didn't want to cooperate, So when the DA pulled, when they ran their game, I was like, this is exactly what they want. You guys are gonna throw my phone calls out there thinking that I'm gonna come crawling, but it's not gonna happen, man. You know what I'm saying? So now I'm in a quandary. I got the homies against me. I'm looking at all this time. My wife, she ends up dying. My mom ends up dying. My grandmother died, you know what I mean? So I'm in a dark place when all this stuff's going on. And, there's a couple COs that I had kind of bonded with in the county jail because I was there for a long time, practically their whole career. And they're the ones that were like, you know what, man, fuck them dudes, man. You know what I mean? For once, think about yourself. Think about, your kids, man. I come to work 12 hours every day for my family. Half of them dudes would have done it themselves, man. So, for me, the hardest thing about it was the belief system that was instilled, within me from the time I was a kid. It had nothing to do with the NF or being in Norteño. My stepfather always taught me, you don't tell on nobody, man. You don't throw people under the bus. That's the hard thing that I was dealing with, man. And that's what I had to compromise. But I was in a bad situation. What do? Do I hold my mud and take this 155 on the chin like a jackass and go back up to Pelican Bay, spend the rest of my life up there and be looked at as a piece of shit, no matter what? Even if I wouldn't have cooperated, just the fact that I put myself under that dark cloud, I would have been deemed no good. Or do I maybe try to use this situation to turn my life in another direction, even though it's the most undesirable thing that I've ever had to do in my life? So I made the wise decision, man. It was the hardest decision that I had to make, but when I cooperated, by the time I did, all my co-defendants were gone. It doesn't make it any better, but when they called me in as, to come testify in these cases, I didn't testify as a precipient witness. I had a plan. I went in there and I just testified about how gangs work. The gangs, they're not gonna care about that. At the end of the day, they don't care. You got up in there, but I didn't send nobody to prison. I didn't sit up there and say, this guy stabbed this guy. They had me going on cases that I knew nothing about. The Palmas case was a big case that happened out there in San Jose. Some youngsters that got caught killing Sureños out there, a bunch of them. And I didn't know none of the details of that case, but I just went in there and like, this is how the NF works. This is how the NR works. This is what a Norteño is. So. I don't know if I could have went in there and sat there and testified against my co-defendants and really sent them to prison. But by then, I'd already been there 10 years and everybody was gone. So that's what ultimately happened.
So based on this cooperation, you ended up getting out?
Based on the cooperation, the judge that had sat through the cases, he was like, you know what? I sat here through all the trials. I seen everything that you've done. You walk the walk, you talk the talk. I think you deserve another chance, man. You know what I mean? And they struck a strike and sentenced me to 16 years, 8 months. Basically credited me out. Being there for 10 years, it put me out.
Right, because you do 10 years, but then there's like, you get your time reduced as well. So that ended up being a time served kind of situation.
Right, you get like a day for every 2 days or every 3 days. They compute it somehow like that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I interviewed BG Knockout. He's a regular on my show, and he's a Crip from Long Beach.
I probably seen every interview you've done with him.
Well, so you probably remember this part. He said that the last time he went to prison, he had to really sit down and say, do I love my gang more than my family?
Yeah.
And that was sort of the light bulb that went over his head and said, no, I don't. I love my family and my kids more than this gang. And that's why he renounced being a Crip. And he said he's no longer, although he was a Crip, he doesn't consider himself a Crip anymore. Was that a similar kind of thing that you went through?
Yeah, you know, I mean, the blinders come off at some point, man. We grow up, we start to see things through different lenses, through, you know, you grow up, man, and your values change, and you realize the things that you were involved in, it was senseless, man. I wasn't gonna gain nothing from being in that lifestyle. You know, now I'm serving another purpose, helping the youngsters not make the same mistakes I made. But yeah, you know, everything that I've been through, that was me bottoming out right there. And it made me look at things in a different way. You know, a lot of these guys talk about loyalty. They talk about how real they are with, you know, and they're the first ones, man, to tap out when they get in that situation. The dudes that are saying that they would never do this and would never do that is because they've never been in that situation. But you get put in a situation where you're looking at 155 years or you're looking at 75 years, self-preservation is gonna kick in. It's gonna slap you, it's gonna slap the shit out of you. You know what I mean? It's gonna make you see things different. I've seen it and heard it all, man. You know what I mean? And then I see those same dudes come walking in and they're like, man, B, you know, I get it now, bro. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, you understand how it works now, you know, because again, it's when you're on the outside looking in, you could say what you want. I used to say the same thing. You know, them cats that get weak, that trash, them motherfuckers that turn around and cooperate, you know, that work with law enforcement against us. Never count yourselves amongst, you know, trash like that, those broken men, you know what I mean? But things happen in your life, man. There's forces that push you in different directions, things that pull you different ways. And it has an impact on your decision making and you grow up. So yeah, it did, you know, it did.
How did it feel to walk out of that cell for the final time?
It was bittersweet, you know, because I felt on one hand, I felt like I had to sell myself out to do, you know, to get to where I was walking out. And I would have, it sounds stupid, but I would have rather have that not happened, those phone calls, and I would have spent the rest of my life in prison. I look at a lot of homies that are still locked up, and they're the ones that are locked up. I'm like one of the only ones that's out. Everybody else from my crew, they're all locked up. Do I want to spend the rest of my life in prison? No, but I wish those phone calls never would have happened. But I'm in a better place. You know what I mean? I'm in a better place. Obviously, freedom is a good thing. Nobody wants to be locked up. So it was bittersweet.
I mean, because of the cooperation, is there a hit on you by the NF?
There's always going to be a green light. Always. For the rest of my life.
Always. Have you ever had a situation where you've been walking around and someone spotted you, recognized you, and something happened?
Yeah. I've had a couple situations. When I first got out, I had a chip on my shoulder. You know, I catch somebody looking, and, you know, I'd spin off. It didn't matter who I was with and go over there and jam them up, you know what I mean? But I started to realize, man, that, you know, I'm putting people that are around me in bad, you know, I'm putting them in a bad spot. I don't want somebody else to get hurt because of what I'm doing. And I don't do that no more. I see somebody, I'll let them react, and I'll react accordingly, how they can react. Just because I did what I did, and I'm not trying to be a tough guy, man. You know, that alter ego boxer, he's still there. Guys that walk away from that lifestyle, they can still revert back to that guy that they used to be. But I don't want to be about that no more, man. You know what I'm saying? But there's been situations I try to avoid it. I don't go to big functions where the likelihood of me running into a lot of Norteños 49er games, I know they suck, man. Well, actually, they're doing kind of good right now. But I don't go to those big functions like that or places that will that might put me in a spot that it's more likely to happen. I just kind of just live a quiet life, man.
Well, yeah, I've interviewed Blue Boy. I don't know if you saw this interview.
I did.
But he's so you know this is a legendary Crip from the East Coast, and he got out after 30 years. I did his interview, which ended up kind of reverberating throughout the whole system to the point where he got a job as security and so forth. And I talked to him about how do you function in normal society, because in prison someone steps on your foot and it's instant violence. You can't do that at Safeway. You know what I'm saying? You'll go back to prison. And unfortunately, he got a job doing security for in a weed shop, for Big Baby, the basketball player. And apparently something happened, and now he's back in prison again.
Yeah.
Which is sad, because I like the guy. We had a whole full-blown conversation. It seemed like he really understood his mistakes and so forth. But at some point, he reverted back to Blue Boy again. And now, I don't exactly know the details, but it's likely that he may not get out because of all of his priors.
Yeah.
Does that ever bother you? Do you ever think about that? Because right now, are you still on parole or probation, or are you completely clear?
No, I did a year, and I got off parole. So, yeah, I think about it. Sometimes I'm one decision away from spending the rest of my life in prison. Make no mistake about it. I get caught up. There's people that want to see me. Law enforcement ain't doing me no favors. You know what I mean? So, when I got out, I still had to catch myself sometimes, man. That criminal mentality, it's still there. I remember a couple of times going into a bank to cash my little check that I had to bust my ass for, and I see somebody withdrawing a lot of money, and that thought crossed my mind, man. I'm like, fuck, this would be so easy just to follow this cat outside the bank. And then I'm like, nah, man, what are you thinking about, man? You know what I mean? What are you thinking about? So I had to catch myself. To this day, it's been a good minute since I've been out, but it's so deeply ingrained within me. It's just become my way of thinking. I gotta pull myself back. So I got a good support system now, man. I don't think I'll ever return back to prison. I won't allow that to happen. Not everything that I've been through.
And you've completely kicked your drug habit as well.
That experience was me hitting my bottom. My mom ended up dying of an overdose. She nodded out and suffocated herself in a pillow. She leaned into a pillow and suffocated. I mean, obviously she died prematurely. She was using dope all her life, but those things, it was enough for me to say, I'm never gonna touch that again, man.
What was it like going from making fast money to, whether it's drugs or robberies or whatever, to suddenly you gotta have to support yourself through legal means? You're gonna have to get a real job. You're gonna have to pay taxes, which I'm sure you've never paid up to that point. And you have to follow the rules that someone else is setting.
Shit, I paid NF taxes. I don't know what's worse, the government or the NF. Yeah, no, it's tough, man. The fast money, being out there in the mix, slinging dope, being able to make 20, 30 grand, selling pounds of meth. The money comes fast, but now, I gotta work for it. it was hard adjusting to that. You know, that was one of the things that I struggled with. You know, how I was going to support myself, having to work a full-time job, and yeah, it was a hard transition.
Well, yeah, especially because you have multiple felonies on your record. And I've always considered felonies a forever punishment, because if you go to get an apartment, they could ask if you have a felony. And if you say yes, they could say, well, then we're going to not rent this apartment to you. You could go to a job and they can't say we're not hiring you because you're Mexican, but they can say we're not going to hire you because you're a felon. Right. That's perfectly legal. So a lot of times these men get caught in these situations where they get out of prison, they have no place to live. They have to go live with a woman under her rules. You know, she's got her name on the lease, not you. She can kick you out at any point. So now you feel diminished as a man. It's hard for you to get a regular job. So even if you are living with a woman, you can't always pull your weight as a man. And a man is supposed to be the one that's paying for mostly everything. So it creates a situation where a lot of times men end up going back. I mean, did you find yourself in similar situations like that?
I did, but you know, I ended up meeting a beautiful another wife. I got she supported me through all the things that I've been through. She's seen me go through my struggles. Luckily, she's strong. She's strong-minded. So a lot of that stuff I was able to avoid that. You know what I mean? A lot of those kind of struggles I was able to avoid it, but. Yeah, you know, I've been through it on some level. You know, I'm fortunate. I consider myself fortunate.
Well, then 3 years ago, you started a YouTube channel.
I did.
Tell me about it.
So, you know, I started somebody, I forget how I ended up meeting this guy, but he had a channel called Loaded News Media. And he asked me, he was a former member of the Mexican Mafia. And he was like, you know, I put this message out for the kids and I'm trying to get this channel up and running. And he was like, you know, would you be interested in getting on there with me, maybe doing a podcast? So I started doing that with him. And at first, you know, I wasn't out there. Social media wasn't my friend. It wasn't something I wanted to do. I didn't want my face blasted all over social media. But then, you know, when I started getting into it, the mask came off and I started, you know, to try to connect with the kids out there, man, put a message out there. Started talking about my own personal experiences. And at some point, I branched off and created my own channel, Paradigm Media News. And I've been doing it ever since. And it's crazy the amount of support that I get from my subscribers, man. I would have thought that I would have got a lot more trolls, you know, talking all that crap, you know what I mean, about everything that I had to go through. But there's a lot of things have changed over the last 10, 15 years, man. It's all watered down now. People they don't care about gang banging no more. They don't care about prison politics. You know, it's not like it was in the 90s. It's just not like that. Just trust me, man. I know you know this, but you know, so I started putting that message out on my channel. I started talking about my experiences. I was getting a lot of support, so it's taken off. Obviously, my book, that's another part of it. You know, when I wrote the book, when I wrote it, it was about, I wanted to let the active cats know that I used to be, the ones I used to run with, why I made the choices that I did. Part of that message in the book was for them. It wasn't about monetary gain or nothing like that. You know, a lot of Norteños knew me. I became a leader. I had indoctrinated a lot of them. I went through that same process. So I wanted them to let them know whether I understand the belief system, so I know it's not going to change nothing. And that's cool. I understand that. But this is what I went through. You know, if you want to sign up for it, it's all good. Stand on that shit. You know what I mean? But that's not the life. That's not the life to live, man. So. And that's what I do, the YouTube channel. I've been doing it full time, man.
Yeah, congrats, man. You put in 3 years. You had some videos that reacted, and we'll go ahead and add a link at the bottom of all these clips. So if you want to go and check out, Boxer's YouTube channel. Really get it authentic, directly from the source. You should check it out. And also his book, Nuestra Familia, A Broken Paradigm, John Boxer Mendoza's personal journey into a world of deception, betrayal, and redemption, is out right now on Amazon. You could get it on Kindle or on paperback. I suggest you do an audiobook. I'm personally an audiobook guy. So if at some point, actually read it and do an audiobook, because I think more and more people are consuming books this way as opposed to actually reading them. And why do you call it a broken paradigm?
Because it was like a model, the NF. It was a movement. That's how it was based. It was like that's how the NF came to inception. So that's the way I look at it. It's a broken movement. The things that have happened over the years, they're still around. They're still active. But to me, everything kind of changed back in the 90s, the mid 90s. But hey, let me just say this real quick, if I can, Vlad. There's also, if these guys get at me on an email, boxerparadigm@gmail.com, they can get signed copies of that book as well.
Well, yeah, this interview was really based on that book. Yeah. So if you enjoyed this interview, I would suggest that you get the book, which goes into way more detail than what we spoke about, and is much more personal and so forth. So, John, I really appreciate you coming in and sharing your story and the honesty and so forth. You went through a lot, and unfortunately, you didn't hit the jackpot in terms of how you were born. You were born into a nice, stable family where you had a chance to actually be a kid and do kid things and have a childhood and grow up into a well-adjusted adult. You were thrown into a family of drug addicts, and then you were thrown into foster care, and then you were thrown into prison. And, I don't think it's any surprise that you ended up the way you did based on situations that were initially out of your control. But the fact that you actually did take control at some point in your life and did take responsibility for your future and for your family and so forth is commendable. We interview a lot of gang members, but I've never been pro-gang. I've never wanted to join a gang. I've never wanted anyone around me to join a gang. And it seems like in 2023, it gets so romanticized. Most people didn't hear about Crips and Bloods until the movie Colors. And now Crips and Bloods are all over the world. They're in Vietnam. They're in France. You have multimillionaire rappers who suddenly put on a red rag like Lil Wayne, or Chris Brown, who are one of the biggest artists in the world, but somehow affiliate themselves with Bloods and so forth. And you have people who I feel like push this concept and get kids in love with it, not knowing that these guys aren't really gang members in the sense of what a gang member does. Chris Brown's not going to go shoot somebody. He's not going to put in work.
Yeah.
Lil Wayne's not going to stab somebody because his gang leader told him to go do it. No, these are multimillionaires and they're musicians. Yeah. But because of the, this image that they portray, they have the young kids that say, hey, I'm going to be like Lil Wayne. Yeah. Without all the millions of dollars of Lil Wayne, and they have to do all the things that Lil Wayne has never had to do. So I really do these interviews for the realism and for the, for the wake-up call for people, because ultimately, like you said throughout the interview, this all comes with jail and death. And I don't know anyone who got into a gang on a serious level and managed to avoid that. And I've interviewed a lot of people around this life. So John, I wish you all the best, and I truly appreciate you sitting down with me.
Appreciate it. I'm a huge fan, man. I appreciate it as well, Vlad. I appreciate the opportunity, man. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, man. Wish you all the best. Peace.